Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Thank you for tuning in on one of the many media outlets that we are on. I'm Kenny Rice. Delighted to have this man with us from Darby Dan Farm, John Phillips, who is also the past president of the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. We were speaking earlier in the show about we know where some of the big horses go and they have a great life as stud and they're pampered, but there are many others out there, John, that aren't, and I guess that's where Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance steps in.
Correct. Well, so it's a national effort all across the country. The Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance basically is an accrediting body and a funding body. And we have now up to 74 organizations that have over 170 facilities. And these are mostly horses that are getting a soft landing as they come out of racing. They're either going to be essentially in a retirement home if they're not capable of going on for some sort of further activity, or, and of course is our greatest emphasis, retraining to be dressage horses, hunter jumpers, field horses, trail horses, and that sort of thing. And it's a huge effort. We commit the industry commits about $4 million a year to support these 170 plus organizations, and it's growing every year.
Some people will say that most people tuning into this show obviously follow horse racing. But we do get some emails, and I get some questions. You know, hey, I'm a fan of sports, and I kind of occasionally tune in, and I like horse racing, but I'm not a horse racing guy necessarily. They might think that there's just everybody's rich in horse racing, so why aren't all these horses just automatically taken care of?
Well, I think that was a rhetorical question because obviously everybody isn't rich.
I know.
In horse racing, there's a huge industry, tremendous. Yeah, the big operations get all the attention, and
right.
and they should. I mean, they've invested huge capital. It's an art form, and that's what people need to appreciate about horse racing. Yes, it's a sport. Yes, it's a business, but it's also an art, and it's living art. Mm-hmm. And if you go to any of the farms here in Kentucky through horse country, which are accessible now, it's a beautiful, beautiful landscape, and it's well worth seeing. It's maybe not a mountain and maybe not a seashore, but it is absolutely breathtaking. So they do get the big guys do get a lot of attention, and their facilities are amazing. But it's also a huge industry here, and there's a tremendous number of mom and pop, what you could call mom and pop or small businesses here. I mean, we raise, 12,000 foals here in Central Kentucky, and if you think about it, Central Kentucky being the epicenter of the world market, will do over $1 billion worth of horse sales in Fayette County alone this year. That's a huge industry. And 1 in 11 people employed, either directly or indirectly, do so as a result of our sport. So it has a massive economic impact. And whether you're, have 3 or 4 mares sort of on your small hobby farm, or whether you have 40 or 50 that are just a commercially based for clients throughout the world, or whether you're one of the super big guys. It has a lot of vertical economic impact.
And one thing, no matter what sport you follow or if you're casually into it, I think horses are kind of like dogs. Everybody loves them. I mean, they want everybody to be happy and healthy. Pretty much across the board. Well,
so let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's an interesting thing, and it ties into aftercare. There was a period in American history where horses were pretty much utility animals. They were livestock. That has transitioned, and so now, while in Arizona or Texas or Louisiana, you still may have that attitude, cultural attitude, that they're livestock. On the other hand, in places like California, New York, and perhaps Kentucky, they've elevated themselves, horses, the relationship with horses has elevated itself to that of a companion animal, really, as you say, like a dog. But the important thing, and this is what I tell people all the time with regard to aftercare, look, I don't care what your personal values are, and I say this to horsemen all the time. And I'm really not here to judge your personal values, but what we do know as a sport and as an industry is that the attitudes of American people overall have changed. And they require two things. They require really safety of animals, which has really come to the fore out in Santa Anita.
Right.
And they require an aftercare of animals, that these are not commodities that you just use and then throw away. And those are the two underbellies which we see a massive transition going on in the sport. I'm focused on the aftercare side because it's something that I just have gotten into. Many farms, Darby Dan, for example, will have a pension field, and we might have a dozen horses out there that that have lived out their useful life as competitive animals or as reproductive animals. But that's a luxury that we can afford at Darby Dan, and not everybody can. So we have this whole aftercare industry, essentially, that we're supporting. We're making sure they're doing it right, which is the accreditation process, which is very, very extensive. And then we have a retraining aspect to that, as I've said, which is also extremely important, and making sure that those horses coming out of the industry have a soft landing.
We're talking with John Phillips, Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance past president, still very active in it at Darby Dan Farm. Like you said, you have retired horses that are standing out there. Is there a ballpark figure what it costs for people that are interested in the alliance and wanting to get involved? Is there kind of a ballpark figure out there what it costs to keep an old horse up on a farm, for a year?
We have done some calculations in that regard, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood, and of course, it depends a lot on the area. California is so different from Kentucky, but it'll be in this state. It'll be, say, $3,000 to $5,000 just basic maintenance.
Right.
Just to feed and clean water and bedding and that sort of thing. So that does bring up a point, though, that right now to produce a thoroughbred, to breed a thoroughbred, there's $50 for every foal that's dropped. $50 is going to head to his aftercare. $25 will come out of the registration fee, and $25 will come all from the Jockey Club, will come from the report on mares bred. So every mare that gets bred, a $25 fee will be directed to an aftercare through the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, and $25 of every horse thoroughbred registered will go to it. So we start with, automatically, we'll start with $50, and then you can do your actuarial tables and the like, because obviously a lot of horses come back into the breeding operation. A lot of horses automatically go to other areas of endeavor, cross-country shows, backyard riding, that sort of thing.
Now, if someone's listening or watching us on YouTube right now or listening to this show, and they say, I love horse racing. I'm not really familiar with thoroughbred aftercare. I want to donate some money. Easy to do?
It's very easy to do. There are tons of small organizations, and we have several of them here in central Kentucky that are very, very good. You can just look up thoroughbredaftercare.org, and you can come into the Alliance. The Alliance, as I say, supports 75 organizations. We divvy up a little over $3.5 million a year to supplement those organizations. We have some wonderful organizations here locally. New Vocations is a classic.
Right.
Old Friends is a really great organization that's very fun to go out and visit. So, yeah, it takes nominal research to be able to find some place that'll enjoy your money.
Yeah, you figure $25-50, everybody maybe,
I
sound like I'm doing a telethon now, don't I?
Very good, and we'll take that. But it's very important. It really is for the industry to address this. And we've done tremendously well in the last 10 years, but we have a long way to go still. There are areas of concern. You get to Louisiana and West Virginia and some of the lesser, more modest jurisdictions, and there are some issues. Now, we don't have horse slaughter in this country, but there is a real issue of the kind of transportation that animals get to go to Canada or Mexico, and it's a real concern for us. And we're evolving. We're developing more sophisticated triage abilities at the various racetracks. And there are other organizations such as Cantor that helps distribute horses. It's kind of a listing service for people that are looking for horses. And then I think, too, as an industry, we've got to get better at identifying horses before their last race. It's so much easier to retrain and repurpose horses than it is to take care of them for 15 more years after their athletic career's done. It's much more efficient. And so we're working on that. That's all evolving, but we've come a long, long way in the last 10 years on this issue.
It's a wonderful organization, Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. We'll check on that. Please do. You can go at .org. It's pretty simple to look it up. When we come back, we're going to talk more with our guest, John Phillips. Baseball? Why would we talk baseball? You probably already know it if you're an avid horse fan. If you're a baseball fan, you got to stay tuned to this. More coming up here on The Horse Racing Show. Welcome back to The Horse Racing Show, episode 47, by the way. Thanks to all of you who've listened to all 46 prior to this. I'm Kenny Rice. With me is John Phillips of Darby Dan Farm, past president of the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. We've been talking about the care of thoroughbreds after their racing days. Most of those are not stars, as in life. There's only a few stars out there. John, you know, when you look at racing today, I think Aftercare Alliance more than ever needs to be promoted, given it's not been the best of years, obviously, for horse racing.
It's been a real tragic year for horse racing as a sport. Few people appreciate how much and to what degree people that are in the sport really love the animal. And that, I think, is maybe one of the most adverse things that's happened, is that there's a perception out there that we treat them like a commodity and that we really don't care. And I will tell you as firmly as I can that just simply is not true. I always am telling the folks that I'm privileged to work with at the farm, if you want to be wealthy, don't do what you're doing now. But if you want to enjoy life and enjoy the process, the cycles of life, raising thoroughbreds and being a part of this sport is glorious and very fulfilling. It's beautiful.
I want to ask you about Darby Dan. Great history in the sport. Your grandfather, the legendary John Galbraith, gets us started, and Darby Dan with Shadow Gay, Proud Clarion, Little Current. I got to write them all down because I'll miss somebody, okay? I mean, what a legacy that your dad and you have continued on at Darby Dan.
It has been a tremendous ride, and we've been very fortunate. You know, we've been lucky to associate with the right people throughout the decades, and it's been a lot of fun, a lot of hard work, but the family has always enjoyed the outdoors. The family has always enjoyed horses, and so it's not really, it's work, but it's a labor of love. Let's put it that way, and has been for decades.
And a real credit is you don't see all this generational farm. Not many. There's several, okay, but not as many as there used to be.
That's true. I mean, there's only a handful of us left.
I can name them, pretty much all of them.
Yeah,
actually.
You can pretty much name them on one hand, and that makes it special because it's not just the land. It's really the generations of horses that live side by side with the generation of the family members. So, you know, the folks that I work with at the farm, they laugh at me because I'm sitting there saying, "Oh, I remember the Grand Dam and the Great Grand Dam." As I used to laugh at my grandfather, remembering the dam and the great grand dam and thinking, boy, this guy's old.
But now, how many people could have sat down like you did with the legendary John Galbraith and say, I remember Proud Clarion, and I also remember Roberto Clemente, because your grandfather owned the Pittsburgh Pirates and really the glory days, I think 3 World Series, right?
Correct.
60, 71, 79.
No, you're right on.
Good. I didn't have to look at that.
Those were great times too. And I mean, it's kind of interesting because we combined both baseball and horse racing together. And we went in the 60s, and we used to invite the entire team to come when they had a AAA affiliation in Columbus.
Columbus, the Clippers.
Well, it was actually the
before
Jets.
The Clippers, the Jets. That's right.
Actually, the Jets.
Yeah.
And they used to come and play this exhibition game every year, and then they used to come out to the farm, and we used to have a lot of fun showing the entire team the horses, and they thought it was great. And you know, as that transpired over the years, we began to name horses to honor various players in the Pittsburgh Pirates, which was our team for many years. Names like Hail the Pirates and Our Captain Willie, and of course, probably the most famous one was Roberto.
We're talking with John Phillips, Darby Dan Farm. We've been talking about Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. Please support that. But get back to this baseball, because Roberto Epson Derby winner. Wow, I'm trying to think of another athlete who had a horse. A horse was named for that had the success of Roberto. Very few out there.
I can't really remember.
I can't think of
not
one.
To that height. That was an interesting thing, because Roberto Clemente was he was a fascinating and beautiful human being. He was a great baseball player, so
right.
Everybody knows that, acknowledges that. And he was hard to sort of understand for the family, for my grandfather, for my father. He was very humble. He was very dedicated to his heritage, which was both African American and Puerto Rican. So he spoke almost no English when he first came up. And yet there was something about him. A tremendously gifted athlete, just beautiful, graceful athlete. But he always spoke of Puerto Rico and children in Puerto Rico and how he grew up very poor. And he never forgot about that. And for a while, you just begin to think, well, that's just sort of his shtick. But as you got to know him, it wasn't a shtick at all. He was genuinely concerned about humanity, and in particular, Latin America and Hispanics.
And his impact still felt. John Velasquez, the Hall of Fame jockey, who's from Roberto Clemente's hometown, still wears number 21 on his helmet. I didn't find that out till this year, by the way, John. As many times as I've talked to Velasquez,
I never knew that.
So
when I see Johnny,
I found that out this year. Yeah, we were doing a show up in New York, and I noticed on the helmet, and he first told me about it. He said he's from the same hometown in Puerto Rico.
Well, Roberto Clemente was a hero, and it's so sad that he passed away, because I'm sure he would have entered politics and would have been a great representative for Puerto Rico and frankly for the country, for all America. He was genuinely interested in the welfare of his fellow man. And sadly, of course, he died on December 31st while we were all getting ready to go to a New Year's Eve party. He was worried about relief supplies going to Managua, Nicaragua, and had heard that the Army had seized his previous flight and for the black market, and they were being stolen essentially away from the people for which they were intended. So he boarded the next plane to make sure that wouldn't happen, and the plane went down, and he was lost and his body never found. And of course, he's the first baseball player ever to have been the 5-year waiting period to have been waived, and he was inducted into the Hall of Fame immediately. And Vera, his good wife, just passed away about 3 weeks ago.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So he never got to see Roberto the horse,
right?
Although he was very well aware of it, and had he lived into 1973, he made a commitment to come down and see the horse, and he and the family had a great relationship by that time. And of course, it was tough in the 60s.
Yeah.
There was. People can't imagine what the world was like, and I feel great sympathy for the African-American athletes in particular that came through. Even I, back in the late 50s, early 60s, remember going to Fort Myers and seeing colored bathrooms and not understanding what colored and white. I didn't understand segregation being in Ohio, and weren't familiar with that concept really in any overt way, certainly. And so it was tough for those ball players, Willie Stargills and all those guys that came up and played great in the 60s and in the 70s. we can't appreciate how different it was then. And I have tremendous respect for that process that they went through.
That's why I love this show. If I can be a little self-serving here.
Sure.
To talk about things like this, which I think crosses over, which horse racing needs to do a little more, and realize that there's a lot of great sportsmen out there, like your grandfather, John Galbraith, like you are, Mr. John Phillips, and continued success at Darby Dan.
Thank you very much.
I may come out and look at that trophy one day.
I wish you would.
Trophy.
We'd have fun.
Yeah, and please check out and support the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance for all the wonderful work that's done in the industry that acknowledges the horses that didn't become the stars, didn't become the great stallions, but still are very much appreciated and cared for. John, come back.
Thank you very much.
We'll talk
I
more
enjoyed it.
Darby Dan, and we'll talk more baseball anytime.
A lot of fun.
All right, stay with us. More coming up. You're listening to The Horse Racing Show.